reticularis makes the androgens, male sex hormones, and we'll talk more about those in the reproductive system. We want to focus on the outer two layers of cortex and the medulla. We have mentioned these several times during the class so far. For example, very early on we talked about aldosterone in this class. It came up in the kidney discussion. And so I don't think it's worth our time to go back through at this point all the details of aldosterone. But I want to encourage you to do that on your own time. It's very important. The renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system is something that you should spend some time looking at. Again, I expect you to carry that with you as you go through the course. The second layer, which was only mentioned briefly in class last time, the zona fasciculata, is the area of the cortex that produces a family of hormones we call the glucocorticoids. Now, the principal glucocorticoid is cortisone or cortisol, and you can see that it's regulated in typical fashion. We'll talk about that again as we go through all this stress stuff. There's a release of corticotropin-releasing hormone from the hypothalamus and a release of adrenocorticotropin hormone from the anterior pituitary that causes the cortex to release cortisol. The real question here, you've learned the connection between pituitary and the hypothalamus, and you've learned the cortex makes this hormone. The question is, what does it do? What does cortisol do? It's typically referred to as a stress hormone. We say that elevated levels of cortisol or the glucocorticoids, these are indicators of stress, and that's why the slide here has stress as its tagline. Okay, so what do you mean? Stress causes release of cortisol. What does this do? What is this hormone? What is the role it plays? Well, its most famous role, cortisol's most famous role, and its best known role is its role in reducing inflammation. Now, everybody knows the cortisone drugs are part of a very powerful group of drugs that I would guess most people in this room have had at some point in their life, called the steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, the SEDs. So we know that it does this. We know that cortisone causes. Now, how does it do that? Well, cortisone actually changes the way the vascularization works in places where injury has occurred. The body has been stressed with some kind of injury, and cortisone plays an important role there in changing the permeability of the blood vessels. Whenever you damage a joint or something and it swells up, that's because the body has initiated what's called an inflammatory response. That inflammatory response, among other things, increases the permeability in the capillaries in that vessel for the purpose of delivering immune system cells to the place where the damage is. Now, we haven't done immune system yet in this class, but one of the most interesting things about immune system cells to me is the way all the phagocytic cells get into the tissue spaces. So the inflammatory response is an immune response, and these immune system cells get out of the blood vessels in part because of this inflammation response. This hormone slows that down, changing the permeability of those blood vessels, reducing the inflammation by not allowing as much tissue fluid into the spaces out of the blood vessels. It reduces capillary permeability where injuries have occurred. So it feels good. You have an injury to your joint, your shoulder, your knee, it's swollen, you get a lot of pain there. Stick some cortisone in there, it's going to feel better. Now, there is more to the story for cortisone in addition to this anti-inflammatory response. And this is really what I want to go through today because most people know about this anti-inflammation stuff. I think what people do not appreciate about the anti-inflammation is the role that cortisone plays in inhibiting what the immune system is doing. So this is true all over your body. And so you cannot just take cortisone for long periods of time in high doses because it actually inhibits immune system structures all over your body, not just in the places where inflammation has occurred. So it's dangerous for that reason. And it's also, as some of you will come to learn in your lives, these are the families of drugs. These cortisone-like drugs are drugs that people take whenever they have transplants. And the specific design of this is to keep the immune system from killing the transplant. And so these are glucocorticoids that do that. So cortisone plays a role in inhibiting immunity. Here's the second one. This is the one that most people do not appreciate. And it is its role in elevating blood sugar levels. So I want you guys to, this is a huge item in human physiology. Whenever we have a stress response, you know some of the things that are happening because I have talked you through the sympathoadrenal axis. All of that conversation has been about epinephrine and norepinephrine. Norepinephrine from the sympathetic nervous system, epinephrine from the adrenal medulla as a hormone. So what you've learned from me about a stress response, a fight or flight response, is epinephrine and norepinephrine. Elevate heart rate, dilate the pupils, open the airway. These things that we've talked about many times. Whenever I taught you epinephrine in this chapter, I used a picture of the liver to show you that the adrenergic effect on liver is to elevate free glucose. The binding of epinephrine to alpha and beta adrenergic receptors on the liver uses both second messenger systems that I taught you, the cyclic AMP-dependent kinase and the calcium calmodulin-dependent kinase. A double barrel effect, causing large increases in sugar levels. I did that on purpose because now we're talking about hormones, and I wanted you to think about humoral things. Not funny things. Humoral as in molecules, hormones. I wanted you to think about these humoral responses. And so you know sugar's going up in a stress response. This is the stress hormone. So you would expect sugar levels to go up here as well. Now we've got one more big story on sugar coming. It's the next gland on this presentation, the pancreas. So we're going to have to talk about sugar regulation with the pancreas. The pancreas also has a way of elevating sugar levels. We always think about the pancreas as reducing sugar, but it does have a hormone, glucagon, that it releases that can elevate sugar levels. So there are three principal ways that you're learning in the hormone chapter here for elevating blood sugar. Epinephrine, the adrenergic response. The glucocorticoids from the zona fasciculata, cortisone, cortisol. And the third one's going to be glucagon from the pancreas. All elevate sugar levels. Okay, so the question here is then, how? How does cortisone elevate sugar? And why should we care? Well, as you can see here, cortisone causes increases in blood concentrations of amino acids and increases in glucose formation and increases in released fatty acids. Now, if I point to this one, glucose, and I point to this one, fatty acids, your mind, if you had a good physiology presentation, your mind should go where? More sugar and more fatty acids. Where'd your mind go? I had a histogram that I used.
Muscle.
Yeah, muscle contraction, okay? And that presentation was intended to walk you into how the body makes ATP. I used muscles to teach you that. So when you see sugar and free fatty acids, you think energy. That's what you should think, energy, ATP. So what I'm showing you here is there's another phenomenon that occurs with the cortisone shot. It's not just reducing the inflammation. You're going to feel better. Your body is going to have more resources. You're going to be energized and feel healthier because the cortisone causes an increase in the free molecules that your body uses to make energy. It loads you up with energy when you have one of these. Everybody feels better after a cortisone shot, and this is the reason. Now, what's up with this? The amino acid thing and the non-carb thing here. Okay, this is an important observation. Unlike the role of epinephrine, which takes glycogen from the liver and cuts it up into free glucose. The primary way cortisol increases sugar levels is by taking the carbons from proteins and using them to build sugar. Cortisol robs the body's ability to put amino acids together and make proteins. Now that's serious. So what's happening with cortisol concentrations is a glucose formation that is a very famous one called gluconeogenesis, making sugar out of non-sugars. Glycogen, y'all, is a carb. And so when you get free sugar from that, you're just cutting up a big sugar molecule. That's not what cortisol does. Cortisol takes the carbons from amino acids. It takes these amino acid carbons and it says, you cannot be used anymore to make proteins. I'm going to use you to make energy. Now, by robbing the carbons of the protein, stealing them, so increasing the free concentration of amino acids, what you're saying here is you're breaking down protein here and using those carbons to build sugars out of them. And that's dangerous because proteins are the structural and functional units of human physiology. And so we know that a bone, for example, is 40% or so collagen, a protein. We know that all the muscles in your body are principally, by mass, protein, actin, myosin, troponin, tropomyosin. And so you inhibit the ability of the body to make those things under stressful conditions or in a place where you've been putting this stuff into your body. So it's dangerous. You don't just give this stuff for long-term administration. It's not a good idea. It feels good, the inflammation goes down, you have lots of energy, but you can see why this is not good for you. Ultimately, these hormones do damage in the human body. Now, your textbook does not mention this part, but I always bring it up with students to sort of drive home I'm going to come back to these in just a second, I'll show you these diseases. I actually saw this guy give this plenary lecture, Sapolsky, out in California. The first time he gave it, it was published in the Journal of Neuroscience many, many years ago. I don't know why textbooks don't mention it, but here's the abstract from it, and I'm not going to make you read this. I put it on the slide so you can read it later. But here's the point of his research. They discovered by stressing primates, so they had a primate research facility out there at Stanford, by stressing primates, something else happens in their brains. They actually measured a significant reduction in the viable cells in the hippocampus of these primates who had been exposed to long-term stressors. Now, what did I just say? Yeah. There is a significant cell death in an area of the brain that we know is important in converting short to long-term memory with exposure to stress. So all of that is intended to get your attention with the stress situation. Whenever you say stress, these are the things I want physiology students thinking about. The role of the glucocorticoids and all the places where they can do damage and their real role. I guess we're left with a sort of philosophical question at the end of this. Why does the body make these stress hormones? Survival. It's a survival thing. Yeah, just like the fight or flight response. So these hormones actually play a tag team role with the sympathoadrenal axis and a stress response. Now there's some clinical things that I have on here. Cushing's syndrome and Addison syndrome, very famous hyper and hypo adrenal cortex hormones. Cushing's is a hypersecretion of ACTH, and look at the things that this might cause. A hypersecretion of ACTH might cause hyperglycemia. Could you explain that? These people who have Cushing's syndrome, a problem with their adrenal cortex, a genetic problem, where they overproduce ACTH.
Cortisol.
Yeah. So this is what I just taught you. Now, Addison's is a a secretion phenomenon with ACTH, and you get hyposecretion of both the glucocorticoids and the mineralocorticoids. And so this can cause hypoglycemia. This can also cause dehydration. Now, you can do the hypoglycemia with Addison's. Can you do the dehydration? This is your clue right here, a sodium-potassium imbalance.
So it will cause that imbalance in the kidneys will cause not enough water to be reabsorbed?
Exactly. So what is the role of aldosterone in the kidney? Sodium-potassium pumps, and specifically where in the kidney? Late distal convoluted tubule, and what does it do there?
It produces more protein.
Okay, there's more proteins, yes, but for what purpose?
To increase water uptake.
Okay, so
Bring the sodium potassium back in, or the sodium back in, and
back
follow
into
the
what?
water into the body.
Into the body, right. So to get the sodium, the salt, if you will,
To reabsorb it and then
out of the tubules. Yes? Okay, so if you have a hyposecretion of this in Addison's disease, what happens?
There's not enough.
So the salt stays, the sodium stays in the tube, and so
The water
the water stays in the tube. And so dehydration. So that should make sense to you. All right. Now, this is a look at some folks who have these conditions. I found these online. You can see what's happened to this young man in terms of his appearance here with Cushing syndrome and stuff that mentioned already. Hyperglycemia also could result in hypertension. We'll talk about blood pressure more as we go along in this class. But I just like for you to see these things. This is very prototypical. In fact, this kind of phenomenon where this sort of moon face appearance and these this unusual adipose deposition here in the cervical region, very common thing that you see in people who take glucocorticoids, cortisone stuff long term. Same thing will happen to them. Interesting. My wife's grandmother, her mom's mom, had some serious health problems, and they had her on some long-term administration of steroidal anti-inflammatories. And she would, her face would kind of change shape a little bit when she was on those. And evidently, the medical community, this was, 20 years ago, I'm hoping they do better now, was not paying attention to what this could do to her bones. And we were visiting them in South Louisiana one time. She stood up from her chair, and when she stood up, her right side went, and she fell down the floor. Where her femur attaches, the acetabulum just completely sheared off when she stood up. And it was painful, obviously, but looking back on that, they should have known better. They should have been doing something to help her with her bone situation when they were giving her all that cortisol.
Why does it cause you to gain weight?
Let's see if we can think through that, because that is a really good question. I should have brought this up already. Why does it cause you to gain weight?
If it's adding glucose and you're not exercising a ton,
In fact, it doesn't matter how much you exercise. Your body cannot possibly burn all the fuel. Yeah. So what does your body do with sugar that you don't burn? Stores some of it as glycogen. The rest of it gets converted into adipose. That's right, fat tissue. Exactly. So normally people who are on these drugs or people who have high stress situations are prone to gaining weight.
It causes you to eat more too, right?
Yeah, it increases your appetite.
Because it's taken away from your protein, so
Yeah, it's multiple
want to eat
effects.
more.
It's not just the taking away of the protein, but there's also hypothalamic eating centers around the third ventricle that are sensitive to sugar levels. And so they think you need more and more kind of thing, and the body is in survival mode. And part of survival mode is an increase in appetite as well. So very powerful hormones.
So So the like drug-induced crushing, like when you're on the the cortico,
Uh-huh.
when you get off of that, does it like correct itself?
I think so, Hannah. I don't know all the details of that. I would expect it to. Your negative feedback system should take over after that's done. This one we talked about here, Addison's causing all kinds of other problems. I'm not going to ask you to know this. I feel like students get interested in this. This is the list I gave you a second ago that I'd like for you to know. But one of the things are these blotchy melanin patches that also show up in people's mouths with Addison's disease. This interesting phenomenon there. I don't know how to explain to you. But I wouldn't ask you about tuberculosis and tumors and bilateral hemorrhages. This is not a medical class. These things make sense in terms of the physiology you've learned. Hypoglycemia, sodium potassium imbalance, dehydration, hypotension, weight loss. These things all make sense with the physiology. Okay, so there's the adrenal cortex, and this sort of summarizes it. The things that I've said, you can see if I roll from this side over to the adrenal medulla, there's some things to point out here. First, you can see the hypothalamic influence of the adrenal gland. So signals out of the hypothalamus that are involved in controlling preganglionic sympathetic fibers in the medial lateral cell column of the spinal cord. That should sound very familiar to you. In the fall, I taught you all of the somatic motor neurons are down here in the ventral horn. In this middle region right here, it should be out here just a little bit. It's called the lateral horn. That's where all the sympathetic preganglionics are. And you can see there's a synapse here, but what's missing in this picture for sympathetics is the chain. And I pointed that out to you. The adrenal medulla thinks it's a sympathetic chain neuron. And so this projection from the cord is actually a preganglionic projection. Right? Most of the time in the sympathetic nervous system, the pre goes to the chain then goes to the organ. But in this case, the adrenal medulla is the chain. So there was a solid line on that picture that I showed you. The preganglionics are all myelinated, and there was no dotted postganglionic projection. And it makes beautiful sense here because if this is actually a sympathetic chain area, the chromaffin cells of the adrenal medulla, remember, come from the same place that the sympathetic chain neurons do developmentally. The only difference here really is the presence of the enzyme that adds the methyl group to norepinephrine. So instead of making mostly norepinephrine, about 20% of its norepinephrine, it makes mostly epinephrine because the enzyme converts the norepinephrine to epinephrine, and then those catecholamines, epinephrine and norepinephrine, are released, and they do things that you really know a lot about now. Increasing heart rate. I'm not done with that. You know from me already, beta-1 adrenergic receptors on the heart make the heart rate go up, and they make the heart contract stronger. But we're not done with that. That's coming again in the next chapter. Increases in blood pressure. The liver converting glycogen to glucose. Could you do better? By way of what second messenger systems? Cyclic AMP, both, right. It's the cyclic AMP system and the calcium calmodulin system. The dilation of the bronchioles. How? What are the receptors there? Beta-2 adrenergic receptors. EPSP or IPSP? In the smooth muscle of the bronchiole. IPSPs, yes. The beta-1s are EPSPs, the beta-2s are IPSPs. So relaxing the airway. Changes in blood flow patterns. How so? Yeah, so your blood pressure goes up. You expect, when the blood pressure goes up, for there to be massive vasoconstriction in your system. Is that true? Well, yeah, but there are places, so massive constriction in most of the non-essential places, right? All over the gut, all over the thoracic cage. But we're going to get dilation in the skeletal muscles, in the coronary arteries, in the blood flow to the brain. Yeah. Okay. And then, of course, an increase in metabolic rate, which is what you guys worked on in lab yesterday with thyroid hormone. So this is a list here, but you guys, at this point in your lives, if you've learned about the catechols and you've learned about the cortisol, you've learned about these things, you should be able to explain them. How about this one over here? Mineralocorticoids and glucocorticoids in response to stress. What's the principal mineralocorticoid? Produced by the zona glomerulosa. So mineralocorticoids, glucocorticoids, sex hormones. Mineralocorticoids from the zona glomerulosa, the principal one is aldosterone. Glucocorticoids by the zona vesiculata, the principal one is cortisol. So aldosterone, right? Could you handle this? How about these over here? Proteins and fats converted to glucose or broken down for energy. I just made a big deal about this. We don't make proteins. This is damage, stress damage, preventing the formation of protein. What is the process called by which those carbons are used to make sugar? Make the sugar out of carbons that are not sugars. This is called gluconeogenesis, the new beginning, yes, of sugar. It's not made out of, it's not a breakdown like these guys do. So increases in blood sugar, and look, there it is. The suppression of the immune system. There's the anti-inflammatory effect. Suppression of immune system work. All right. Now the next gland is the pancreas. And the pancreas, obviously, everybody knows the pancreas is an endocrine gland that regulates sugar because most of us know somebody who has some form of diabetes, either type 1 or type 2. So here's the simple story for the pancreas. The pancreas is both an endocrine and an exocrine gland. When we get to the digestive system, we will do its exocrine function. So you guys know this from anatomy. There's a duct that runs through this gland. And it connects right here to what structure? There's a duct that comes out of the liver and one that comes out of the gallbladder. And it comes right down next to it, and the pancreatic duct comes right over here and joins it. And they all empty together.
Common bile?
The common bile duct is the one that comes from the liver and the gallbladder. The one out of the pancreas is called the pancreatic duct, and they join together to empty into
The cystic?
where? Yeah, into the duodenum, exactly. Into the small intestine at the hepatopancreatic ampulla. The sphincter of Oddi regulating these things going into the duodenum. Now that's digestive function. And when we get to the digestive system, I'm going to teach you the names of the principal enzymes that are made here for the exocrine function. Y'all, if you have a pancreas problem, normally it shows up first in the digestive system. So normally people with pancreatic cancer normally begin to lose weight and have problems in the digestive system before they start noticing sugar problems. So the pancreas is a really important digestive organ. Okay, but in this chapter, for us, it's an endocrine organ. So there are cells outside of the duct system that produce hormones that are just released into circulation in an endocrine fashion. And those hormones, the two principal ones, there's actually three big ones. Somatostatin, heard that before. And it's going to come up again in the digestive system. But the two principal ones that are made by the pancreas are insulin and glucagon. Insulin causes declines in blood sugar levels, and glucose causes elevations in blood sugar levels. Now, this one people know about, so let's talk about it first. This big protein, I think it's about 52 amino acids joined together here, insulin. It actually decreases sugar levels in two ways. Now, I taught you at the beginning of this chapter that insulin is a powerful hormone because its receptor, can you finish the statement? It's a powerful hormone. You can't just inject insulin into somebody because sugar levels will plummet. In fact, you cannot just eat a candy bar and get away with it. If you load your system up with all that free sugar, the insulin levels are going to spike. And what you thought was a way to get sugar levels up and make you hyperglycemic actually 20 minutes later makes you hypoglycemic because of the power of this hormone. And the first thing I told you about it was insulin's powerful, and I can explain that in part because I said don't get cocky. Remember? I got a cyclic AMP pathway, I got a calcium calmodulin dependent pathway, and there's a lot of steps that have to occur for a hormone to do its thing. What about this one? Two pieces of the insulin receptor. When insulin binds to it, it autophosphorylates. The receptor for insulin is a kinase. So all that business about activating a G protein and then going to an enzyme and having the enzyme convert ATP to cyclic AMP and the cyclic AMP activating a kinase, you don't have to do that with insulin. The kinase is immediately activated, it self-phosphorylates as soon as insulin binds. It's powerful. The receptor's different for insulin. Here's another reason why insulin is so powerful, because it can reduce sugar in two ways. First of all, insulin, this is an important one, insulin causes increases in a carrier protein for sugar in the membranes of cells where it binds. So there are insulin receptors all over you. And when it binds, it actually causes the phosphorylation of what's called a GLUT4, very famous insulin-dependent receptor, a GLUT4 carrier protein. And that receptor in the cell membrane creates a specific channel for glucose to get into cells so that it can be burned. The truth is, without insulin, even though you've got a lot of sugar, you can't use it because it facilitates the entry of sugar into cells so that it can be burned. The second way insulin plays a role in decreasing sugar levels are the receptors for insulin on the liver. When insulin binds to its receptors on the liver, it runs the catechol process backwards. So remember that catechol process where you phosphorylate the enzymes and you create free glucose? It goes the other way with insulin. And so it causes the liver to sequester the glucose and convert it into glycogen. So you'll get a lot more glycogen storage in the liver cells whenever insulin's around. So two ways: burn more sugar, store more sugar. These are roles for insulin. Now, glucagon, on the other hand, also is a very powerful hormone. Glucagon, as it turns out, can also run that catechol pathway to make free sugar in the liver. It can actually break down glycogen. So glucagon is a catechol-like hormone as far as the liver is concerned. It will give you more free glucose when glucagon is around. But in addition to that, glucagon can also facilitate gluconeogenesis, stealing the carbons from the proteins and making sugars out of them. So I always like to think about glucagon as the sum total of these guys. I learned one way to get free sugar from epinephrine. I learned another way to get glucose from cortisol. This guy can do both. So it can give you free glucose from glycogen. It can also give you more glucose by stimulating gluconeogenesis. So it's a very powerful. Glucagon can elevate sugar levels very quickly. Name the three bigs. The three bigs that elevate blood sugar in humans. The three bigs, what are they? Epinephrine and norepinephrine, so the catecholamines, cortisol, and glucagon. There they are. The three bigs for getting sugar up in the human body. All right, now, I want to talk about diabetes with this, yes. I'm going to come back to that picture in just a minute. So there's some terms here. I think every student who takes physiology should get some terms here with diabetes. So the word diabetes means to siphon. The word diabetes means to siphon. Now, there are multiple diabetic conditions that humans can get. The two big ones where the two big diabetic conditions where the body actually gets siphoned are mellitus, which I'm about to talk about. It's an ITS. And the other one is insipidus. Now, I waited to bring this one up. It's conceivable I mentioned it in passing. I don't remember. But I always bring it up here. That's why I don't worry about it, because I always bring it up here with the diabetic conditions for human physiology. Insipidus. Insipidus is a pituitary problem. A posterior pituitary problem, specifically, where there is a reduction in the amount of ADH release. Now, this is probably related, I don't know all the genetics behind it, it's probably related to a problem in the paraventricular and supraoptic nuclei and the production of ADH. But we know that people with this condition, diabetes insipidus, have a low level of ADH in circulation. And that will tend to siphon people. So here is the kidney tube, and here is the blood vessel. This picture should look familiar. The blood vessel and the tube and the blood vessel. So normally what happens is aldosterone comes along and causes the salt to come out. And ADH comes along and pulls the water out, and these guys end up back in circulation. This was the major process of reabsorption that I taught you with aldosterone and ADH. Now, if the levels of ADH are low in this condition, the water stays in the tube. And this stuff is headed to the bladder. That is a siphoning effect, a dehydration effect. So diabetes insipidus is siphoning the body because of ADH. Mellitus does the same thing, diabetes mellitus. Now you know already that the body filters sugar. And so there are sugar molecules potentially in this tube. But normally you won't find those sugar molecules in the distal convoluted tubule because they're all reabsorbed in the proximal convoluted tubule. But for a person who is diabetic, who has a problem with sugar levels, so the blood levels are extraordinarily high, so a normal level is around 90 to 100 nanograms per milliliter. These are standard glucose numbers. But you have a diabetic, they might be 350 when they do it. And so they're going to have sugar in their urine. And so you know the sugar molecules are passing through the distal convoluted tubule. There's too many of them. They overwhelm the receptors in the proximal convoluted tubule. Now, the sugar molecules that are found here, because there's too many of them, that are going to end up in the sugar, they're going to end up in the urine. This is one of the diagnostic tools for diabetes, mellitus. These guys serve as solutes. And water tends to go with the solutes. So aldosterone and ADH are doing their job, but the concentration of the filtrate is much higher, which means the water will not leave as fast as it would have otherwise, leaving the water in the tube. And so that is also a way of siphoning people. Mellitus means sweet. Sugar is in the urine. The sweet siphon, diabetes mellitus. And there are about a half dozen different varieties of this. You need to know the two big ones. They are type 1 and type 2. Type 1 diabetes is normally called juvenile onset. And it is a problem with the beta cells of the pancreas. This I didn't mention a minute ago. I should have said it. There are 3 varieties of cells within the islets of Langerhans in the pancreas, where those endocrine things are. The alpha cells that are there, they stain differently. You can see them in a histosection. The alpha cells there make glucagon, and the beta cells make insulin. That's important. Alpha's for glucagon, beta's for insulin. The reason I say that's important is because people with type 1 juvenile onset diabetes, for reasons that are oftentimes not understood completely, have their beta cells die. Now, it's called juvenile onset because most of the time it's young people who develop it. So of all the diabetics in the world, less than 10% of them are type 1s. We all know about diabetes because of the type 2 epidemic we have in our country. But most people are not type 1s, although they are arguably the most famous because people with type 1s don't make any insulin because their beta cells are dead. And so I know people who have these things they put on their belts, and they put a little tube in their stomach, and they put a dozen times a day, they prick their finger, they get a glucose number, they put it in, and it delivers insulin as though you had a pancreas on you, delivering the insulin. It's fantastic. I mean, I have a good friend who's had type 1. She developed it as an adult. She's had type 1 now for 20 years with no impact at all on her ability to function. She has her eyes tested regularly because this is a problem. When the sugar levels get up, the very sensitive blood vessels in the choroid of the retina tend to burst, and you get, I showed you a picture actually of a diabetic retinopathy, an eye where all those little white spots in the retina, indication of diabetes there, bad things happening with vision. The peripheral circulation gets bad because the high sugar levels cause the blood pressure to be up. It causes the blood vessels, the smaller blood vessels, to get brittle, especially in the hands and feet. The feet are a big problem with diabetics, oftentimes for circulation. So type 1 is the most famous juvenile onset. Now, we also know that, and I speak from personal experience with Holly, that we don't completely understand. It's a genetic phenomenon normally. But she developed this, she was almost 30 years old when she developed type 1. And the doctors told her they think it was caused by some sort of either autoimmune thing or some kind of virus that she was exposed to, or maybe a combination of those. The endocrinologist told her that he's seen a lot of this where people get exposed to a weird virus. They have a long kind of illness where they don't know what it is, and they can't get rid of it, and they finally do, and then something else goes haywire. And for her, it was her pancreas, and he thinks that the immune system began to produce antibodies against some viral protein that was similar to the proteins on the beta cells, and her immune system actually killed her pancreas, the beta cells of her pancreas. And so she developed type 1. So people who have type 2, this is known as adult onset, this is most of the population. Type 2 diabetes is really difficult to explain because their pancreas actually makes insulin. And so the textbooks always hide this problem with explaining it. This kind of thing's never good enough for me. It's not good enough for the students in my classes normally. You guys have been around me long enough to know now that, okay, well, explain that to me, yeah? So type 2 is difficult to explain, and what we get is there's a problem with the receptor. There's plenty of insulin, but a problem with the receptor. And we know that exercise and weight loss can sometimes completely reverse type 2 diabetes, along with diet. So what in the world happens to the ability of a cell to produce a GLUT4 carrier protein because of weight loss and exercise? Nobody knows the answer to this question. But it is a phenomenon. It is an epidemic in our country. We know this, type 2 diabetes. Okay, so what are some of the clinical things, words, clinical vocab, that'll help us describe the things that happen with diabetes mellitus? Okay, 3 cardinal signs. 1, polyuria. Huge urine outputs. We can explain this. Polyuria. Polydipsia, excessive thirst. That makes sense. And polyphagia, excessive hunger and food consumption. So these are 3 real typical things. I like to bring them up. You got to know these words. They're prototypes. They're all the polys for diabetes. Polyuria, polydipsia, polyphagia. These are the 3 cardinal signs of diabetes mellitus. Okay, so this makes sense right here as well. Now, let's talk about this one for just a second. This picture is not in your book, and this is something for you to learn later in life. I had to learn it in grad school as well. I'm a little sensitive to it sometimes with if time permits, I kind of dig a little bit further than I should. But the reason I bring it up here is because of a phenomenon that we see with sugar regulation in the human body. Okay, so let me use another example. You can do it with diabetes, fine. But let me use another example for you that will illustrate this that you're likely to run into if you haven't already. And that is very low sugar diets. Very low sugar diets. In fact, several of these, the South Beach and the Atkins diet, require individuals who are wanting to use these low sugar diets to lose weight to go through a period of induction, a 2-week period where they're not allowed to have any sugar, 0. Now, if you do that to your body, 0 sugar, you have essentially done to your body what the type 1 diabetic experiences. Do you see that? The type 1 diabetic has plenty of sugar, but what does the body think? Don't have any sugar. Right, so exact same things happen. So the logic behind it makes sense. But I'm going to walk you through this so that you can see. If you know physiology, you're going to tell people, look, I would be careful about that. There's a price to be paid. Your body was designed to have 4 organic macromolecules put in it. Sugars, fats, proteins, and nucleic acids. This is what it's looking for. These are the pancreatic enzymes that are made. This is what the body needs, these 4. If you take one away, it's going to do something else. All right, so diabetics do this. These people go through what's called induction. And the book says it, the Atkins book says it in the first page. We want you to put your body into ketoacidosis. Ketoacidosis. Now, when your body does not have sugar to burn for energy, what does it burn? If you're a muscle physiology person, you know your body likes 2 sources for energy, and they are sugars. Your body doesn't want to burn the proteins. That's malnourishment. Fatty acids, right? Triglycerides. So you want to burn triglycerides and you want to burn glucose. And which of those is a better source of energy? How'd you know that? They go first, yeah, the triglycerides. The body likes the triglycerides better, the muscles do, and there's good reason for that. Because a glucose molecule has 6 carbons on it. But any given triglyceride will have, 100. I mean, these long chains of carbons on those triglycerides. They got lots and lots of carbons to burn. So it's a better source of energy. Okay, so the body likes to burn those 2. I take the sugar away. What's the body going to do? It's going to burn the fats. Yeah, and that's exactly what happens. The ketoacidosis thing puts the body in a situation where all the enzymes that run the engine retool. It's like you got to go out. So the factory was running both of these very efficiently. And you take this one away. And so the manager goes out and he retools the whole factory, and now the whole thing is set up now to burn fat. And man, the weight comes off like crazy. But there's a price to be paid for that, because burning fat produces ketones. And ketones in the human body are acids. Ketones give up their hydrogens. So if you were to measure a diabetic's blood pH, normal blood pH is 7.4, and theirs is always less than that. Type 1s always have a slightly acidic condition in their body. They're always slightly acidic because of this, because of the ketone production, because of all the fat, because of all the adipose burning that's going on here. Now, we can take this a step further as physiology students. All of the excitable tissues in my body have to have, so I'm talking about nerves and muscles, heart, blood vessels, smooth muscle walls, all excitable tissues that make action potentials, all the neurons. We have a situation that we can describe here where there is a distribution of sodium and potassium on the inside and the outside of the cell. And as good physiology students, you know how important the appropriate concentrations of sodium and potassium are. This is extremely important. Now, I emphasize this, I always smile when I get to this point because I've had many students over the years send me clinical sheets of patients that they've seen where the kidney was gone wacko or something else and there was a potassium imbalance. And I always emphasize with you guys, in the lab, I always show the students the action potential generation with no stimulus. Do y'all remember that? We messed with the potassium concentrations and the thing's firing and we're not even stimulating it. Okay? So, what does the role of sodium and potassium have to do with this? Okay, so now I'm going to draw a kidney tube here. This would be the distal convoluted tubule here. And this stuff is headed out to the bladder. I taught you acid-base balance in the kidney. I said this happens in two places. Most of the acid-base balance happens in the PCT. Carbonic anhydrase allows us to reabsorb bicarb and to put the hydrogen into the urine. So urine should always be more acidic than body fluids. Normal body fluids, 7.4. Normal urine is around 7. It's more acidic because the urine is a way of getting rid of all this excess acid. And you also know already in this class that the principal acid-producing molecule for us is carbon dioxide. CO2 in water makes carbonic acid. That was the story of the carbonic anhydrase in the kidney proximal convoluted tubule, and it's coming again. Y'all, if you want to explain why the stomach makes acid, you got to know that story again. It's the same story. We're going to find carbonic anhydrase in the stomach, helping us make acid. Okay, so this is the normal way. Normally, this is what we do. The PCT regulates this. But we also know that there are these proteins in the distal convoluted tubule that secrete, right? Secrete means take it out of the capillary, peritubular capillaries, into the tube. And there's a balanced secretion of hydrogen and potassium. Y'all remember that? There's a balanced secretion of hydrogen and potassium that happens late in the kidney system. It also plays a role. It's not the kind of magnitude that the PCT does, but it's playing a role. Now, this has to be balanced in order for your body to maintain a good balance of pH. Now, I'm diabetic. I'm doing lipogenesis. I'm running the beta oxidation pathway. I'm making ketones. What's happening to the amount of free hydrogen in the blood? It's increasing. Exactly. And that will be reflected. That will be reflected in the DCT and the blood and peritubular capillary. So now the peritubular capillaries late in the system think, I've got to get rid of more hydrogen. And they will do that to the neglect of the secretion of the appropriate potassium levels. And it will cause potassium in circulation to go up. And I mentioned this to you, late in the kidney thing is a very common way of creating a very dangerous condition for human physiology called hyperkalemia, where the kidneys oversecrete the hydrogen because of what you've done to the body. It's in ketoacidosis, and so you've created a hyperkalemic situation for these individuals. Now, if the potassium concentrations are out of balance in circulation, does that matter? Okay, so that's why I want you to see this one more time so you can tell this. I always tell people who ask me, and I mention every time I bring it up, look, just measure your respiratory rate and your blood pressure when you're doing this to your body. I'm not completely opposed to this idea of people going on these low sugar diets, but there's a price to be paid. You have to count the cost if you're going to do something like that to your body. So now you can explain it to someone, yes? There's a price to be paid for this. Take your blood pressure and your heart rate when you're doing it, and you'll see something is going on. When you go into ketoacidosis, you are not healthy. All right, so we just got a couple more to do. This was the one where I was going to bring up some more of the sodium and potassium, but I did all that with you already. So the last part of this on Monday is going to be just a smattering of things, most of which will come up in other sections of the semester. Gonads, thymus, just bits and pieces of stuff here to finish it up. Monday's lecture will be about 15 or 20 minutes. You'll have the rest of the time to ask questions for your exam on Wednesday.